What's going on, guys? Welcome to let me shut this music off, episode 39 of Dispersing the Cloud. I don't know the total number of books that we're in right now, but I know it's over 65 books read, which is pretty freaking awesome. I've been able to have the conversation with a couple people about what happened after 20 books and what happened after 30 and 40 and 50 books, and now after 60. I really feel like I've answered the question of, this debate question of, do CEOs make too much money? One of the things that we wanted to answer, me and my buddy Daniel wanted to answer before we could even tackle the question, was how difficult is it to actually read 60 to 100 books in a year? Because most CEOs claim to read 60 to 100 books in a year. And what type of knowledge gain would that grant you to, justify that amount of pay? I can tell you right now that the amount of effort that I've put in just, what month is it? October? So we got October, November, December left. And the amount of effort I put in to get through 60 books and actually retain the information and take notes on it and try to apply it in the projects that I'm doing, it's exhausting. I'm constantly moving. I'm constantly doing something. I'm stressed out to try to get these projects done and then regurgitate those projects to you. I think the knowledge that I've gained in the year is irreplaceable. I was talking to my buddy Jordan, who runs an ad company up in Orange County, and he was just talking to me about just the value and the knowledge that I can pull from now when I'm talking about anything. It's like movie quoting. I have 60 books that I read this year that I went through, that I took notes on, that I can pull from and give people little bits of wisdom it's not my wisdom. I'm literally just regurgitating information that I got from somebody else. So I really think that I don't know if they make quote unquote too much, but I will say this project of me reading 60 books and going through 60 books in a year has definitely improved all the projects that I have, the businesses. It's made me start projects that I wouldn't have started. All the above. It's been amazing. Let me recap this week. We have week recap Monday. I got to hang out with my nephews, which was pretty awesome. My sister-in-law came into town. They flew in, so I spent pretty much the whole day picking them up from the airport, having lunch with them, and then sending them off. It really just eats up the whole day when I head into SAC like that. Tuesday, I ended up booking 3 schools, so the phone calls that I've been making have been paying off. Wednesday through Friday, I worked on 3 different productions for Fragoza Media, which was awesome. And Saturday, I hung out with Sasters and my buddy Matt for both their birthdays out in Lodi. And Sunday, I played for Liberty Towers. I think there's a couple different things going on in like my day-to-day process with all this stuff. First thing is probably I'm getting back into shape. I've been back in the gym for probably 6 weeks now, and I'm starting to actually physically see it. I've been eating better. My energy's been higher. I've been way more productive. I mean, today's Sunday, and I've been rocking since I think I woke up at 6 a.m. today to get to band practice on time. I took a short little 2-hour break to make myself some dinner, but other than that, I've been on the road, just dropping stuff off, picking stuff up for different projects, and I stopped in a t-shirt spot out in Lodi for Rags, actually this t-shirt company. Dropped some shirts that they made up for us to them, and I started documenting everything on social media again. I took a social media break in in September, and I'm back on now. So if you guys follow me on Twitter normally, that'll start kicking back up for this next book that we read. And then I'm going to start doing a daily video blog on Snapchat. That's the Gary V recommendation thing to kind of do and utilize each social media platform in a different way. That way people who are following me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Snapchat, they're not getting the same feed regurgitated to them on each thing. They're going to get something different. So on Snapchat, they'll get a daily video blog of just what's going on. On Instagram, I'm going to try to stick that to mostly music stuff in the Instagram story. Music and business as far as like things that I have coming up or projects that I'm working on. And then the Facebook, obviously I'm using Facebook to do Dispersing the Cloud, so that's a totally different avenue that I'm using. And then Twitter is just basically motivational quotes and quotes that I like, so it's a shortened version of Dispersing the Cloud. You don't get any explanation for the quotes, you just get some great quotes in there. So I'm utilizing all the different avenues of social media in completely different ways, which I think is how you should do it, so you can build your channel to different audiences. And then the second thing is I'm going through my goal for 2018. I'm starting to ramp up the goals for 2018 because we're only a quarter away. We're only 3 months away from 2018, so I'm starting to kind of put goals in place of what I want to accomplish next year. I was looking at goals for this year, and I actually accomplished a lot of them. There was a couple of them that I fell short on. I still got some time, but I think those goals will come really easy in 2018. I'm gonna double down in 2018. For those of you who watched the last episode, you know that I'm looking for a position right now in a church where I can still do music full time, get paid to do that, and then continue to do all of my supplemental income stuff that I do right now, and kind of double my income a little bit. So we're gonna see how that works. It's been a weird process. I haven't filled out a job application in probably, I would say in 5 years. I haven't filled one out. I didn't have to really fill one out for my Dignity Memorial job. That was a word of mouth. Someone told me about the job, told me how to go talk to the person, and then just kind of went through a verbal interview process. And I submitted a resume, but it wasn't anything like what I've been going through this last week, shooting out job applications to these churches who not only, I mean, it's not like you're applying just for a normal job. Like, they want to know like your statements of faith and what you think about baptismal and what do you think about Christ and how does it work within your life. Like, you're writing essays, and for someone who's dyslexic, it's freaking torture. So I spent a lot of time doing that today. Yeah, so that's kind of my process right now. This week I read a book called The Shallows. Now, this book was recommended to me by the pastor at Vinewood Community Church. Vinewood's where I would say I attend church. I'm not there very often because I'm out playing at other churches, but that's where my community is. That's definitely where I connect with people the most. And he was talking about this book, The Shallows, and the book, just a general overview of the book is, human beings are very in-depth creatures. We are very soulful. There's substance to us. And this book has to do with information and the way that we take it in. And information is getting much more shallow, depth-wise, right? Not necessarily content-wise, depending on how you define content, but the depth of it, the meaning of it is very, very shallow. I mean, you look at Twitter, you have 140 characters to make a statement, right? And so the book looks at our brain, and it actually kind of is trying to decipher of how we understand or how we intake information, and then when we intake that information, how we retain that information, and then how we regurgitate that information, and how does that affect us. Super interesting book. I'm just going to kind of go through the quotes here. I obviously didn't take these on Twitter. I took these on my iPhone notepad, so I haven't read them yet. I'm hoping they all came out correct because I use the voice speak. I'll just go through them. Does the internet help us? It changes the way that we think. Is that way better? Is reading becoming obsolete and being replaced by scanning? So one of the things that they notice when people actually read websites is they're not reading right to left anymore. And some of this stuff might be repeat, so I apologize, but I'm just going to dive into the stuff that's really on the top of my head. They jump around. they're scanning for important information, kind of like you would do when you read a website. Anyone who's ever read a website kind of knows, like, you just kind of look at the website as a whole, and you look for bullet points that kind of pop out at you. You don't read the website from right to left all the way down to completion. That's just not how you operate on a website. And so the book kind of opens up with not a negotiation, I'm trying to read ahead, opens up with this narrative of, is reading becoming obsolete in the way that we do it, in the way that we read books? There was one statement that he made is talking about how when you read a book, it's almost as if you have to slow down a little bit to read, to intake a book. When you read web pages and texts and Twitters and Instagrams, it's very, very quickly, and your attention just rapid fires. Next generation, net generation, not next. Net generation, so internet. Net generation no longer reads from left to right. We talked about that. They scan the entire page, searching for pertinent information, much like a dyslexic person. So this is very interesting. I kind of added that last part, much like a dyslexic person. A couple weeks ago, I read The Gift of Dyslexia, and I did a little spiel on that. If you guys didn't see The Gift of Dyslexia, you need to go check that one out. That's probably my favorite video blog so far, and one of my favorite books of the year because it pertains to me. But that's how I used to read, because I couldn't read. I literally saw the page as one whole page of words, and I was looking for answers somewhere on the page instead of trying to read left to right. When our brains lose sensory inputs, they compensate by heightening the sensory inputs of others. When an amputee feels a missing limb, this is how that's understood to be replacing those sensory inputs. So when we lose sensory inputs, other parts of our body pick up the slack, so to speak. This would explain people who are blind and having a much better hearing. If you guys haven't seen the YouTube video of the guy who's been blind since birth and uses clicks to walk, he literally is sonar. Look up YouTube, look up Sonar Boy. And he literally is blind, and he uses clicks to find out where things are. And he's literally like just walking around by himself with no help, just making it happen, just using clicks. It's crazy. But when we lose sensory inputs, like our eyes, like an arm, we have other parts of our body that actually replace those sensories. That's the wrong way to phrase it. Replace those, I guess it would be neurons firing in our brains that would be telling us that something's being touched, like a hand that isn't there. But our body compensates and recreates those in other ways. The brain and the mind to which give rise is forever a work in progress. This was an interesting concept that I think we kind of know to be true, but we don't really operate in our lives like that. Our brains grow and mold. They're malleable, right? They aren't fixed. There's a debate in the book of whether you are born with a certain brain capacity, and obviously some are born gifted and some are born lacking. I was born, now I believe I was born gifted, but just not understanding how to use my particular style of learning. But I mean, I struggled a lot when I grew up reading and functioning in a normal learning curriculum, right? But our brains are so amazingly adaptable to our situation, and they're continually growing constantly. And so this book is making the argument that with practice, anything that we do with our brain becomes more ingrained in us. And so in this particular case, reading a website, practice at it, reading online is actually making us worse readers and less depth of emotion and less depth of feeling. Let me keep going because I know there's going to be some quotes on that later on. It was in the Mastery of the First Clock were manufactured, and it was the church bells that sounded the hours. Hold on, I'm trying to kind of read ahead. The months did not keep. Oh, so it was a. It said it was a monstrosity. It's kind of saying. So it's not monstrosity. I apologize. It was the monasteries. There's dyslexia again for you. It was the monasteries that actually came up with the first clocks, and it was the church bells that rang that signaled the clock. So they make the argument that before clocks, before we had this time, right, this distinction of time, it's right now it's 11 o'clock. Before we had that time, literally we functioned through time as more of a feeling. If you've ever been to the wilderness, and you don't have a clock, you don't have a phone, you don't have anything, and you're just literally out in the woods, you get a new sense of time to where the time doesn't matter, it's more of the feel of the day that matters. And you get this like wave-like just effortlessness of just like, it's whatever, like whatever we feel like. Is it lunchtime? I don't know, I'm not very hungry, so I guess it doesn't feel like lunchtime. Time just kind of flowed. It didn't have a set duration behind it. Let me see if I can shut this notification off here. It's telling me I got a low battery, and I'm saying I don't care about that, Joe Dirt. There we go. So that was pretty interesting. I didn't know that. Would say that the choices saved for every humanity with their own consciousness. You guys want to see how I do this normally instead of trying to read like a crazy person? This is how dyslexic people read. Let's see if I can give you a visual example. This is my life.
Would say that I choose shade fabric of humanity with their own consciousness and instrumentalist. What are you got? Tools are subject only to those who use them.
So that's how I function in my normal life. I just don't waste time reading because it takes me so long.
Languages that are symbol based, such as Chinese, have a completely different mapping system in languages that are phonetically based.
So that's how I roll. That one's actually really interesting. So languages like Chinese that have a picture-based, right? That's almost like a dyslexic-based system. The mapping in the brain is completely different than something that is phonetically based or something that is written out. Another really interesting fact was when they first came up with phonetics, right? And they first came up with written language. A lot of the philosophers at the time, Aristotle and Plato, and they really were talking about how this would, how that actually changed the way that we intook information. So they would say that before you would actually have something written on your heart, meaning you would have to recite something over and over and over and over and over again before it really drilled into you, and you'd place that on your heart or your memory, right? And that's how you would remember it. So the feeling of that was very, very deep. Let's see if I can pull it off. Like it's worry not because soon you will be, worry not because soon you will be a skeleton or dust or a name or not even a name. For what is a name but echoes of sound? That was Marcus Aurelius, right? But the only way I'm really going to get that is to keep repeating it and repeating it and repeating it and repeating it. And that's just something that I heard, like, I think 6 months ago I read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. But that's something that I'm trying to embed in my heart by repeating it and repeating it and repeating it. Really, I could just Google it really quick and find out exactly what it was. Because of that, most people are less likely to embed it in their deep souls. So that's what it's kind of making the argument. That there's different mapping for phonetics and there's different mapping for picture-based words. An inventor is the most reliable judge. Oh, this is really interesting too. An inventor is not the most reliable judge of the value of his invention. And this next quote goes with it. O man full of arts, To one is given to create the thing of art, and to another measure what harm and profit they have for those that shall employ them. That was a really cool quote for two different reasons. One, someone who invents something isn't necessarily the best judge of that invention, of how it's going to help, or whether or not they should or shouldn't invent it. We're talking about the atomic bomb. We're talking about who did the typewriter. The guy who did the typewriter, I think this book was saying that he like hated the typewriter after it, and he was like, I wish I never would have invented that. I could be misquoting on that one. But the person who invents the thing doesn't necessarily give it the public's view of what the value is, the perceived value. It's usually other people who give that value. Aristotle argued that the tool of the alphabet robs us of deep thinking. So it was Aristotle, it wasn't Plato. Before written word, a man would have to inscribe words on his soul. No man uses letters, and now man uses letters and papers and parchments and puts the words there instead of on their soul. Script was basically, or they call it scriptural communication, which was basically like auditory, was obsolete. No, I take that back. Scriptural communication, scriptural continuum. Kid can't even read. Scriptural continuum is where, when they first started doing phonetics and putting together an alphabet, there were no spaces in words. And that actually stopped around the 13th century, but I found that to be really interesting because when you were looking at a work that was written out, you literally would have to sit there and try to decipher what was trying to be said. But again, it goes back to this thing about being very, very soulful and insightful when we're doing any type of reading, which is much different than what we do now. Let's see what else we got. The inventor of the letterpress did not benefit from its success. His name was Gutenberg, and so he invented the letterpress, and he printed like a crap load of Bibles on it, and then couldn't sell them. And so he had all these loans out. He ended up foreclosing on all of his loans, and the guy who loaned him the money, he actually took over the printing press and started printing books and making books readily available. People thought like it was witchcraft, that books were just super, like everybody had books to sell, and they were like, how are you doing this? Because up until the printing press, everything was written out by hand, and books just weren't readily available like that. And this is all obviously leading up to the internet. So after his invention, an estimated, so this is really cool. So when he invented it, the 50 years after that, right? 50 years after he invented it, they said that it superseded the amount of books that were written or that were produced in the last 1,000 years of production freehand. So in 50 years, he superseded 1,000 years of books that were in circulation. So the printing press really changed information for us. For one thing, it went from storytelling and books being very not available to literally being everywhere, and kind of the internet like doubled down on that, or even quadrupled down. Google has a program and had a program, a national, or I forget what they called it, but it's basically a world library of every single book that's ever been published, and they literally were like scanning books in without copyrights, and they ended up getting sued by the Writers Guild and all these other people. They ended up making a deal for some royalties to continue scanning books, but then people make the argument that Google had a monopoly on it. Anyway, that's not really what we're talking about. As we change the way that we read books from hardback to digital, we run the risk of losing an all-inclusive experience. Inclusive referring to the immersion of one's imagination into the author's rendition. So part of the argument is of, again, this book is called The Shallows, meaning there is no deep understanding. I'm going to be honest, when I read these books, when I listen to them, I'm distracted sometimes. A lot of times I'm driving. If I'm not driving, I'm on my phone and I'm checking other stuff, you know? And so the only reason that I'm able to get this information and be able to regurgitate it and be able to take notes on it, is probably for two different very, very important reasons. One, I'm dyslexic and I learn audibly incredibly well. If I hear it, it's in my head, it's stuck. I paint a visual picture of it, and it's just embedded in there. Two, I'm taking notes, right, on this. And then three, I'm regurgitating those notes to you, which is basically the three ways that you retain information, right? You hear it, you write it, you say it. That's the three ways, and we learned that from Smarter, Faster, Better, Charles Duhigg, right? And again, the only reason I can do that stuff is because, and I can remember who wrote the book, and because I keep regurgitating this information to you guys each week. If you guys do any book reading or any type of trying to get some growth, if you're not talking about it with your friends, you're wasting your time because you're not going to retain it. You have to tell people about it. You have to talk about it. And the more in-depth conversations I have with my buddy Casey, and I got to hang out with JR, if he came down from Southern California with his girlfriend, and just have some amazing conversations about in-depth things, because they read books and they are interested in the stuff that I'm reading. But if you don't talk about it, you don't keep it. This was really interesting. So in Japan, there's something called like cell phone novels, and what they're doing is they're literally writing novels via cell phone, and it took off in Japan, and it really is speaking to how differently younger generations are actually reading. They're not reading novels, they're reading cell phone novels. They're reading basically text, like little word text back and forth. It's just really, really crazy. I feel like that would only, I feel like that would only watch videos. So Vooks is something too. Vooks is a new medium. It is a book with embedded, not pictures, videos. Books with embedded videos. But again, we run into the problem with someone like me who's dyslexic. I ain't going to read any of that. I'm just going to watch all the videos and try to deduce what's going on from that. It's kind of just the nature of it. The net's, not capacity, circuits, both. Let me see, let me robot read this real quick, because I got a couple misspelled words, and I'm using speak text, so sometimes the stuff just comes out all jacked up. Let's see what we got here.
The net's cacophony of stimuli short circuits both conscious and unconscious thought, preventing our minds from thinking deeply or creatively. It is because our brains are being remodeled to operate less depth and more predictability.
So, this was actually a crazy word, and I didn't even get to look it up. Cacophony. And it was basically saying that the way that we are intaking information is basically making us multitask. And when we multitask, we're less creative. And they showed this in a bunch of different research in the book. But when we're trying to multitask, we're actually not very creative, because being creative takes very in-depth feeling. When I hit writer's block, right, and it was actually talking about this for people who write poetry, people who write songs. When I hit writer's block and I try to multitask my way out of it, meaning like if I just go lay down for a little bit, if I just sit there and lay down and think about what I'm writing and let my mind go blank, all of a sudden everything just pops into my head. I'm like, that's it, and I run back to the piano and I start playing. But they're making the argument that when we are getting used to reading the internet and we're multitasking, we're doing all these things, it's making us think more predictably and less creatively, which in turn less deeply. Trying to read a book while doing a crossword puzzle is the equivalent to creating while online. Oh, I'm sorry. concentrating while online. So if you ever try to write an email, right, and then you have your Facebook notifications on, and you have your email notifications on while you're writing the email, and you have your Instagram phone going off, you got text messages coming in, it's very, very difficult to do. One of the things that I really like to do, you guys can hear I got classical music playing in the background. I feel like classical music for me shuts all the other senses down, and it entertains the dyslexic part of me, right? When I listen to classical music, I can read fairly well. I can write fairly well without freaking out. If I have dead silence and I'm trying to read, I mean, if you guys saw the Dispersing the Cloud episode of This Is Lex, I'm trying to look at a 3D view of the page, and I can't do it. When the music is playing, that mind's eye is like chilling right here and listening to the music and chilling out, and I can actually focus and read. And it ends up, like if you're reading, like I love to read The Alchemist physical book while listening to classical music. It starts like having its own little epic tale. You got to listen to classical music medley and then read like Wild at Heart by John Eldridge, and it will like start playing like Lord of the Rings stuff in the background, and John Eldridge is talking about like killing a lion with your bare hands. It's freaking awesome. Try reading a book while doing a crossword puzzle. We just did that. The more you multitask, the less deliberate you become. Increasing your ability to multitask could lower your creativity. That's speak text taking over. But as we increase our ability to multitask, we are lowering our ability to actually be creative. And I would have to agree with that. When forming memories, it takes at least an hour to embed the new information. Should we be taking the time after reading to let information sink in? They did this really cool test with two different groups of people where they gave them a list of names to remember, and then nothing, let them just sit there for a little bit, and then came back the next day and they remembered the list just fine. They did it again, gave them a list, then gave them another list immediately, and then came back and said, what's on the first list? And they couldn't really remember that well. And so it's this idea of letting everything sink in and becoming more depthful. So the book kind of left it with an open-ended question of, is it better? Is it worse? It's definitely different. I would say that there are attributes to the technology that we have and the access to information that we have. Without this technology, I wouldn't even be able to do this project, be going through books and reading books, because I struggle with reading, right? Someone like me, it has to be auditory. It has to be, I'm an audible learner. That's how I have to intake information. So there are pros and cons to it. I think to be conscious that this is actually happening would be very prudent for anybody. To know that the internet is robbing you of your creativity, and multitasking is robbing you of your creativity and your depthness and your emotion. There was another part in the book that they were talking about. People were having trouble feeling emotion when they're dealing with short texts, right? When you get a longer text, it just drives you more emotionally because you're having to connect with that person on a deeper level. That's all I really have for you guys for this book, for The Shallows. I would say via interesting, 5. Applicable content, probably like 4. Some pretty good stuff. I love the book. It was great. I don't know what I'm reading next week. I think I'm going to do The God Ask. That was recommended to me a few months ago, and I just haven't got around to it. There's 3 months left of this project, which roughly gives me, depending on, I don't know how many months are in each month that we got left, but I'm going to say that I have like 12, right? I got 12 weeks left, which probably is another, if I push it, I can get another 20 in. So I can roll around 85 books for the year. So I'm going to try to push it for the rest of the year and get some more books in. Next week, coming up, If you guys don't know, hsbweddingplanning.com, we launched a flower club, so you can see our first blog that's up there. I got my friend Jessica, who's doing the designs for the flower club. That's my wedding planning business that I have, that I've been helping run. It's going good, so go check that out if you guys haven't checked that out. I'm gonna start getting some booths around town for one. I actually have physical albums now, or physical CDs, that I can actually sling a little bit and sell. And I'm gonna be talking to a couple different radio stations about submitting my music to radio stations. I kind of got that whole process figured out. And then I'm supposed to play at Ukiah Brewing Company this Thursday. I gotta contact them tomorrow and find out what the deal is. What is the dealio? For the food of thought, or for the ending quote for you guys, I've been slacking on these. I've just been kind of giving general quotes or general ideas. I'm gonna do better. I've been rushing these, and this is actually the first Dispersing the Cloud I've done on time on Sunday night in a while. So I'm trying to catch up. I'm trying to do better. But I want to leave you guys with this: is your internet use or your multitasking consciously making you less deep, less in-depth, less relational with the people? Yeah, you got all these friends on social media, right? We have tons of Facebook friends, but when was the last time you actually took the time to call one of your good friends and have a 15-20 minute conversation with them? One of my friends, Chad Satterfield, who's a good buddy of mine since elementary school, he's great at this. Of if I call him or he calls me, like, we talk for a good 20-30 minutes and catch up, which is fantastic and so important. And think about that. I want you guys to think about that. Follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and remember, I got my Snapchat rocking now. I'm gonna do probably like 10-15 videos a day just on the day-to-day, and see how long I can keep that up. Talk to you guys soon. I'm gonna shut this bad boy off.